Welcome to another installment of Top Shelf Word Salad.
Yes.
What are we going to talk about today?
Joe Rogan and the blank storm.
A blank storm.
The storming of desiring to blank. So Neil Young and Joni Mitchell and my extreme disappointment. I think that's how I'd put it succinctly.
Extreme disappointment.
I can't believe they would try this cancellation tactic, like kicking him out of the cool kids club or something. You can no longer belong here.
In the Spotify club.
Yeah, the Spotify club. Right. I will no longer be associated with this rabble.
And Neil Young started it, and then Joni joined him, and some others have too. But basically, they said, "We demand Joe Rogan be kicked off of Spotify, or else we're taking our music elsewhere."
It's just amazing. I really, I don't know. I just don't see why they would take the cancellation process as a tactic. 100 years experience in marketing between the two of them, and this is the angle. I'm surprised.
It's more and more people have been doing it lately, so it's at least it's
popular.
It's a contemporary strategy.
Yeah.
But to me, I guess the weirdest or hardest part of it is that I think it's ultimately about freedom of speech.
Yeah.
Right. That's like people get canceled for various reasons, and many of them are deserving. I would say, but when it just comes to talking about things, and and this back and forth over who should be able to say what and where, to me that's kind of the point, the reason that I'm so disgusted with this.
Yeah, me too. And you have these freedom-lovin hippies, though they be ancients now, they are just not exhibiting a love for freedom for sure.
Nope. That's the irony of it.
Yeah. It's just amazing.
I don't really want to pile on them as much as just to talk through some of the issues, just because if you've read through any of the Twitter feeds of anybody, it's like Neil Young's getting roasted over this.
Yeah, good.
I don't think there's any reason to just talk about how disappointing it is, or how stupid it is, or whatever, right? Yeah.
I agree. But Joni Mitchell,
because
she's a musical genius. She really is. Anyway, what you gonna do?
I don't know. So, kind of a dumb fight too. So Neil Young is less relevant than he's ever been, and Joe Rogan is probably more relevant than he's ever been.
Oh yeah.
Spotify's paying Joe Rogan like $100 million to be the number one podcast and probably the number one contributor of revenue to their business. So it's like if that's the how the battle's set up, Rogan's going to win that every time.
Yeah, no doubt about it. It'll be interesting to see if there's a certain contingent in our culture that just keeps trying to hammer Spotify into obeying on some level. If Spotify will start, maybe. I think they did put up some type of warning thing before his podcast, or some of them, or
they talked about it.
Yeah.
So I want to say I think Spotify handled it well. Like, they came out just a couple of days later and they had a well-crafted statement about publishing versus just having a platform, and the need to police things and balance free speech with safety.
Mm-hmm.
I think they said all the right things. And one of the things I think they had discussed with Rogan was doing some sort of disclaimer at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And Rogan said he'd be fine with that. There's no problem.
Okay.
And I think he came out too, a week later, and he addressed it.
Yeah.
And he apologized, and I thought his apology was genuine. And he's basically the point he made was, look, I'm just talking to people. I'm not trying to drum up controversy.
Right. Yeah.
Some of the stuff is controversial, but that's all I've done here on this podcast is just have conversations with people, and not just with Robert Malone, but many other professionals, in this space that hold opposing viewpoints to Malone's.
Right. Yeah, it's very that's the other thing too, is as far as Neil and Joni and as really anybody who's taken up some type of, panic, offensive, I don't know, it's not even offense. I'm just throwing their arms up in the air and going, oh my God, this misinformation is be responsible for killing tens of thousands of people. How can you, and
Right.
It just ends up, they state this, but they don't point to specific citations. What exactly was it that was said? Hello, Neil and Joni could just get together. They know each other. They could rub together some of those billions of nickels they have, and they could, get some like panel of experts even to review both podcasts and point out the parts they think lean into malfeasance, right? And then go on Rogan's podcast. They could pay people to research this stuff since they themselves are not experts, obviously. So,
yeah.
I mean, that would be something that they could then get their information they want to get out. I guarantee it would be very well viewed. It'd be interesting.
Oh, yeah, great content.
And it could probably even be hilarious at times. I mean, I don't know.
But instead, it's the ringing of the alarm without being able to point to anything that's alarming.
Yeah.
Like it. And I've looked into it a lot more than I would have otherwise. I've done research. I can't find the specific things. Everybody seems to agree it was the December 31st episode with Robert Malone, which I listened to about half of.
I listened to the whole thing.
And
I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I can understand. The one with Peter McCullough was, in that he stated that you cannot get COVID twice, right? He says you can't.
Mm-hmm.
So what somebody's getting is a mutation. It's not the same thing again. And he's saying,
right.
that natural immunity is by far the best defense. So
right.
That I would think is more incendiary than anything I ever really recall from Malone's whole thing. But maybe I'm...
That's incendiary, right? So, and if that's the worst thing you say is you can't get COVID twice, which is got to be patently false, right? I mean, you can't make an absolute statement about this stuff,
right? Yeah.
So fine, if that's a piece of misinformation, like how damaging is that?
Right.
Like what's the?
But why doesn't anybody cite even that? I mean, imagine Paul Revere riding into town going, "They're coming." Who? Them. They're almost here. Run!
There's a bunch of them.
Run which direction?
Yeah.
Any direction.
I think a part of the reason, though, honestly, is that there really aren't facts about this stuff. There aren't concrete facts. There are research studies, some peer-reviewed, some not. There are, different interpretations of these studies. They will point out tendencies, but there's no set of facts that you can rest upon. It's biology, for God's sakes. You can't. I think that's part of the problem is, in the last 2 years, anybody with a little bit of curiosity has become like an armchair epidemiologist or biologist or whatever.
Right.
Like, I've learned a lot about this stuff, but it really just serves to let me know how little I know, and probably how little we all know. And that's kind of evident in all the zigs and zags and changes of in recommendations that have happened over the course of the past 2 years.
Yeah.
So
it becomes so
that would make it hard to point to something specific that was,
Yeah, well, they could point to something specific they said and then claim whatever the claim is, which would be equally as squishy, possibly, as whatever they said, right? So it's like the boundaries get squishy. And in that squishiness, people, both are capable of releasing misinformation as well as then creating a situation where the claim of misinformation is itself misinformation. So I don't know. Side
topic. We gotta talk sometime about the words misinformation and disinformation.
Yes. Yeah.
Because it seems like one side of every discussion uses misinformation while the other side likes to use disinformation.
Yeah.
It's what it seems like. I'd have to check myself on that, but it's curious.
Yeah.
But back to the point, I do know there was a letter that was undersigned by 250 doctors that was written to Spotify, I think a couple of weeks before Neil came out, and they basically were like, "Hey, look, there's some misinformation happening on the show."
Yeah.
And it was like on a blog was the open letter. And then you could click through to kind of get to some of the things that they were talking about, although it wasn't super clear. But for one example was, he was recommending ivermectin as an alternative treatment for COVID, which is 100% true. I saw a podcast where he said that, and I saw that in a number of places.
Yeah.
And I just don't. So that's fine. That's what was specifically said. What about that is harming people?
That's the thing, If they're just going to use that and they're not going to get vaccinated because they think ivermectin is the way to go, I mean, it's not like he ever said that. But I mean, I don't know. I don't know where that leads. And you have plenty of examples of it being used in other countries, and what he used was prescribed to him by a doctor for that reason.
Yeah.
So I maybe take issue with the doctor.
Right.
A patient following their physician's advice is not something, we can lay some type of claim of crime upon. It just isn't. I don't know.
It would seem like a stretch.
Yeah, a big one. And on that, it was 270 something people, right? I never did. I should have looked into this before this, but I didn't find out how many people on that were actual physicians, MDs.
Oh, I didn't look at the list. It was presented as 270 doctors.
It was not. There were plenty of people who, had a podcast, or somebody who was a vet, or somebody who, was a nurse practitioner. And Lord knows I am not down on nurse practitioners, since I myself am a psychiatric nurse practitioner. But the, what it claimed, I mean, it's just ironic as hell that all these people are, he's putting out misinformation. There's 270 doctors, and then that's misinformation.
Right.
I mean, I don't know. It's unreal. And to see all of these people online especially, but then like in the media just go hog wild. And then, somebody puts together the Joe Rogan N-word mixtape, right? So he can then any means by which they're capable of attacking, they're going to stoop to, I guess.
Yeah.
Including making that ultimate mix.
Yes, 100% agree. And I have to say, I think Rogan's answer to that was very, very well done. It's not like he's fighting and he's like, okay, you're going to do this. I'm going to,
right.
I'm going to fight it. He's like, no, times have changed. I'm self-aware.
Right.
Things were different 20 years ago. We talked a lot about pushing boundaries in comedy. Like, I'm embarrassed about it. It's a bad look. It's hard for me to watch. Like,
yeah.
I think other people would have reacted differently or said nothing.
Right.
So I think it just speaks to him being aware of what his words do.
Yeah.
And
I mean, you can
where he stands.
That's such a major contributing factor, I would think, to his success. If he's a good listener and he's not taking himself too seriously, he's capable of changing his mind in real time if he has better information. I don't know, like the whole thing is just gross. It's just gross.
Oh yeah,
in
a lot of ways.
Yeah, smearing, sliming, canceling, and that as a means to get the right information out there. I mean, please,
No,
that's obviously not the point.
If you're cynical, you could say it's this is a movement to promote Neil Young's catalog.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
Well, I mean,
so I looked at those numbers. I mean, what happened is he pulled his stuff and basically made up for all of the streams he had been selling, and then some, on all the other platforms. So his streams went up by like 40% for a couple of weeks, and then came back down, and it seems to be at the level he was at before he took his stuff off Spotify. So,
he broke even. Basically.
He's not driving tons of streams.
No. Yeah.
But it's kind of interesting.
Yeah. I mean, that would be hilarious. It's just, that's so kind of, I mean, give Neil the mad scientist, of marketing award.
Right.
Maybe
If it had worked, I don't know.
Maybe that 100 years of marketing has added up to more than I'm capable of realizing.
Yeah, and then I guess Neil kept on going too, right? So the following week or the week after that, he called out Spotify employees, and he was like, "You should not work there.
Right.
You should be working somewhere else." So he's giving career advice to people based on where they work. And then I think the last thing was he said he was going to take his money away from the big banks that are basically, conspiring to create global warming and all that kind of stuff.
Really?
That was a couple of days ago.
I didn't catch that part. I knew
So
that.
don't bank with Citi, don't bank with Chase or Wells Fargo. And I mean, his $200 million does probably mean a lot more than my bank account.
Yeah.
Like, again, who are you attacked? Like, okay, you're kind of anti-corporate, I guess.
Yeah.
Sure.
So does that mean there's like one unbelievably happy credit union out there now that like
It's just the one down the street from him.
Yeah. Didn't he own Lionel Trains at one point? The miniature
Did he
trains?
really?
Yeah.
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Wow.
I think he's a huge model train enthusiast. Anyway, that's totally aside, but
I got one.
Well,
I learned something interesting in all of this research. So there's a company called Hypnosis. It's spelled like the people that designed the Pink Floyd album covers.
That's what I thought of immediately.
It's spelled just like that, but it's called like the Hypnosis Fund, Music Fund. So this is a company that buys publication rights from all over the place, like pop songs, big hits, and they bundle those together, and you can directly invest in the proceeds that those generate. And their whole pitch is, the value of this music catalog doesn't vary over time, like with economic cycles, and it always is going to go up. So it's a good investment. So they own this company, Hypnosis, owns half of Neil Young's catalog already.
Oh my gosh!
Which means Neil didn't decide alone to pull his stuff from Spotify.
Yeah,
he had to get their vote as well.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's really interesting, and maybe not fantastic, but just incredibly interesting. Wow. So the idea of bundling this stuff, it just reminds me of like the mortgage loan bundles that crashed everything.
That's right.
But so, wow, that puts a whole different spin into that. I mean, maybe there was marketing genius in this, and they approached him, and maybe he also has some like desire to take down Spotify. I mean, Spotify sucks for artists. It's terrible.
He hates him. He's on record from like 5-6 years ago. The interview was with Howard Stern. It was a really good interview. But he was launching a music player.
Oh, that's right.
High fidelity, high definition kind of thing, which was 192 kilobits per second. So it was not really like that much better.
Yeah.
But his idea was he was going to sell hardware and a streaming service that the hardware only could play. This was 2015. It flopped in
really?
3 weeks, or I mean, some absurdly small amount of time. He sold like 10 of them and
was the
folded. But
hardware was mad expensive.
I think a few $100. I think. Okay. And he was pitching it in that Stern interview, but he was saying like that he disliked streaming services in general, and it was about sound quality and fidelity, but it was also about the shitty payments that they were making for what they were benefiting from. So this is not like out of the blue,
right?
Any sort of antipathy towards Spotify.
Yeah,
it's been out there a while.
I do too. I mean, they my stuff's on Spotify, but good God, I mean, you get nothing.
Nothing. Not even like checks for pennies.
Oh no. Well, the way I have it set up, it has to add up to a certain amount before I get a check. But it just takes. I mean, the plays add up to very, very little.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's just such a weird time period, and it's strange to me that this like the cancellation thing is such a freaking phenomenon. And have you been watching anything with the truckers in Canada at all?
No.
Oh man,
what's going on?
Oh geez, definitely check that out. We can talk about that as its own separate thing. But
is it vaccine related?
Yeah, and mandate related more than anything. So, but there's this enormous amount of truckers going across. They went to Ottawa. I've been to Ottawa. It's a beautiful city. But they basically put up not necessarily a blockade, but anyway, we can talk about that another time. But a lot of the media push is just the same kind of thing. Like, they want to take away funding, take away everything, just cancel. You're gone. But the cancellation is internet related always. You're off the internet. You're off this platform. You're off social media. No more YouTube for you. It's just bizarre. And it seems so against free speech to me.
It's divisive as hell too. It's just,
I mean,
but there is a place for it. So when you think back to Me Too, right? I think that a number of things that had gone unaddressed for a long time got to be addressed.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying it made anything right.
Yeah.
But I'm saying it's a conversation that had to happen, right?
Yeah.
And that's when I first noticed people getting canceled, and it's like there wasn't a word for it yet. We didn't know it was getting canceled.
Mm-hmm.
But there were some pretty horrible things that had gone on that really needed to come to light, and we needed to know about. So it's not all bad, but if it's about free speech, like, that's a sacrosanct thing for me.
It is. It absolutely is. And the idea of letting someone who has horrible things to say speak, to me, is a far less horrible situation than having a situation where that is taken away, and then it's also taken away from people who should be able to, even if they're saying edgy stuff, but because they get grouped in the same realm of thought or whatever. It's kind of like that, it's better to let multiple guilty people go free than lock up a single innocent person.
Yeah.
In law.
Interesting way to look at it.
Yeah. There's a similar kind of thought process to each of those. And I mean, do you remember this was in Skokie, a suburb of Chicago in 1975, I think. There was a neo-Nazi rally that actually marched down one of the main streets of Skokie, which is a predominantly Jewish community.
Seriously? I didn't know that.
Yeah, and they let them do it. There was a march in Germany, and the people, I forget, it was a far-right organization, but I don't remember I don't remember if it was a neo-Nazi thing or what. And this is a few years ago. But what some unbelievable genius did is for every certain distance, however many kilometers or whatever, these people walked, it would raise funds for, organizations that they were against. So somebody
that's great.
Ran a sneaky little scam on those people, which was, again, I don't know. In each of these scenarios, you have things that are testing the limits to a degree, but it's better that than have the inability to speak your mind freely.
100% agree.
Damn.
Like, it's like if there are things that are off bounds to say, maybe you can't say them on social media, but it doesn't mean they're not being talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're forced to talk about certain things only with a group of like-minded people, right? I think you're potentially fostering an environment where the words and the speech could turn into action that is dangerous.
Yeah.
More easily than if it's something that's people just say what you need to say, and if you don't want to hear it, tune out.
Right. Well, and a lot of times too, I mean, you end up with somebody who has some grand, edgy statement, and they just look buffoonish. I mean, there's no better way to silence somebody or cancel them than the cancellation of being laughed at by everybody as you walk out the room.
Right.
That's gonna sting a bit.
Yeah. So I was also, it is about free speech for me, this whole topic, but there's also a part of it that's about the monetization, commercialization of content.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So remember, all of this is happening on Spotify.
Mm-hmm.
Spotify's certainly making money because of this, whether or not Neil Young is.
Oh, yeah.
So
it's probably the greatest, getting their name out thing ever. Even though, granted, they're huge and they've been around a long time, but still, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So there is a freedom of speech involved, but it is in a the context of a private company or publicly traded company.
Yeah.
It reminds me a little bit of the whole Colin Kaepernick thing.
Yeah.
All the debates we were having back then about should he take a knee, should he not take a knee, is he allowed to speak in this way? You know, at the same time, he was an employee of a private organization.
Right.
So
right.
there are two sides to it. This isn't really purely about freedom of speech.
Right. But the idea of, you know, your freedom of speech having limits given the fact that you're an employee or employed or however satellite oriented, as in Rogan's case with Spotify, you know, or Kaepernick in the NFL, that's a very porous kind of realm. You know what I mean? In terms of free speech and what are the rights of the company, what are the rights of the individual. I mean, I imagine that's another squishy spot, you know?
Yeah. If you're getting a paycheck from somebody, right?
Right.
Like how much are they able to control you?
Right. How much are they, you know, able, I guess, you know, I'm sure there's a cancel contract at any period in time kind of scenario, right? So if you push too far in some way, they deem you're now a liability. Boop. Done. Mm-hmm. And they have the right to do that, but they don't necessarily have the right to silence you, you know?
Right.
So, anyway.
You can quit.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Ironically enough, it becomes something similar to, like, if you don't like what's being said on this podcast, don't watch the damn thing.
Seems like common sense.
Yeah,
right?
You can turn it off. You have it. There is an off button. People act as though, like, the internet is like the global conscience of our species, you know. And whatever you've done, if it's on the internet, it better be up to snuff, or you're going to get in
it just
trouble.
made me think of something. This whole idea of if you don't like it, turn it off. This is what I grew up with.
Yeah.
It was like, what's on cable TV? If it's offensive or too violent, switch it off. Switch the radio station. Whatever it was. But you know that metaphor doesn't necessarily apply to two-way communication on the internet. In other words, Neil Young, he's not saying take Rogan off Spotify because it offends me. He's saying take Rogan off Spotify because it's dangerous.
Right.
That's a difference, right?
Yeah, that's a difference. But I mean, by not saying what it is that was said that is dangerous, it just becomes so amorphous that they're really the same thing, I think, for me. I mean, because, this is going to hurt people. What is? Again, it's the Paul Revere thing.
You're sounding
right?
The alarm.
Right. Yeah. They're coming. Who? You know.
Yeah. But I'm thinking back to like the storming of the Capitol on January 6th last year.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
That seemed to be a different situation where there was a danger involved.
Yeah.
Not an easy call to make on the part of Facebook, right? Or all the platforms.
Yeah.
Personally, I think they made the right decision. I know that's a hotly contested one as well, but I guess that's what I'm saying is with these platforms, it's not just about if you don't personally like it, just get out of the conversation. There is a legitimate, hey, this is possibly harmful.
Yeah, there's
just based on what it is.
There's that, and there's also the fact that with the internet, it's going to be there for ever. So forever. Anytime if you're just so offended, and you just have to go away. I will not watch this. This is below me. And then next time you're on the internet, you're like, well, maybe just a second of it. Oh my God, I can't believe that. You know what I mean? It's like, did you ever remember Ren and Stimpy?
Yeah.
When Stimpy is tempted to hit the history eraser button. Do you remember that?
Oh,
Can he resist? No, I can't. You become that over time.
Yeah, right. That's a good one, man. That dated reference.
That's
nice, though.
Thank you. That's going back, ironically enough, into history, which was not erased. But well, a big part of my wanted to talk about this with you is the fact that it's something that seems like a nexus. All these different things that are going on have their tendrils to some extent extending into this or extending from it. I'm not sure, right? Like this is like a kind of signal event or something. There's a lot of aspects. How do I say this? There's a lot of things that are going on that have elements that are very similar to this. I mean, we've already touched on a bunch, you know. So it seemed like a good like leaping off platform to start to talk about all kinds of other things. That January 6th, you know, Facebook. We can talk about the metaverse, how ultimately creepy Facebook is.
Yeah, and this is. We're on this topic a lot, it seems like.
Yeah.
So it does come up over and over again, and it is something that I think you and I talk about a lot because it seems to be the same disagreement, the same dispute.
Yeah, yeah.
In different clothes, different contexts.
Yeah. It kind of gets back to that Karl Popper thing of like you how much intolerance do you have for the intolerant, right? And
I haven't heard that, but that's
very
interesting.
Yeah, and so you know, at some point, you have to become intolerant, or society can't hold itself together. It was a large part of his main idea. So, like everybody's favorite example, the Nazis, right? The whole world essentially finally said, "All right, you know." Chamberlain in the UK was like rolling over for them, and Churchill was like, "Get out of the way, you know. We can't put up with this. Screw these guys." Anyway, The Open Society and Its Enemies. That's a book we should read and talk about sometime.
Open Society and Its Enemies?
Yeah, Karl Popper. Yeah.
Okay, that sounds interesting.
It's great. I read it, and I didn't read it well enough because it was hard for me to even summarize to somebody. So I'd love to read it again.
Yeah, good. Another book that I can't explain.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Actually, amazingly enough, I'm about to ruin this because, well, you'll see. This is the only podcast I think we've had where Eric Neumann hasn't come up. But now I just brought him up.
Let's throw in McGilchrist for measure.
McGillabuda. Yeah. So all of this has just been upsetting the hell out of me. I think in large part because Joni Mitchell was involved, and she's my freaking hero. And the stuff she did with Jocko, I mean, God, it's just so damn good. Matheny in the band. I mean, come on. She had just the best people surrounding her. And her entire like conception of harmony is this free floaty kind of approach that has more to do with jazz and, I don't know, Debussy or something than typical.
Yeah, which is not how you really think of her.
Yeah.
Not how I usually think of her.
Yeah, yeah. Lots of different guitar tunings and just lots of different chord structures that are not relying on the root being in the low part and the bass, you know, which opens up a lot of stuff. But a lot of rock music is very much root in the bass. So anyway, like I said, this is a nexus issue that leads to lots of different things. I'm gonna shut up about music now, and Joe,
it's always about music.
I am in full support of Rogan's ability to talk to anybody he wants to and ask questions that he wants to ask, and go back in time and be okay with, you know, not editing himself, but at least kind of giving his past self a slap in the head, you know, for overutilizing maybe examples of why that word is used in comedy, and you know the purposes for it, and then using that horrible Planet of the Apes example. I mean, good God, was like that was just, even at the time, like that, he just was not thinking straight clearly.
I didn't even see it. I just read about it. I don't have any interest in watching it.
It's short.
And by the way, I feel like I need to say I'm not really a Joe Rogan fan.
Yeah.
Like I love I like some of his comedy. He was in a great sitcom early on.
Oh yeah, Talk
News Radio,
News
which I loved, and I loved him in it.
Yeah.
I think his shows are sometimes interesting. It's not must listen for me because it's so goddamn long, for one thing. I don't have that kind of time, but from time to time somebody will say, "Oh, did you hear this one?" and I'll go listen. But I'm not really necessarily, I like what he does because I like the discussion and the forum.
Yeah.
But I'm not really a Joe Rogan fan. Like,
Yeah.
I think he's got fans.
Yeah, I think he does too. And it's really hilarious to think about fans of someone's ability to converse. You know, it's like
It is.
it's like being a fan of, watching somebody walk. Man, can he walk? Like it's something everybody does. But he's a great interviewer, so
he's good at it.
He asks questions immediately, and like you can tell he doesn't care if he doesn't know something. He's not gonna, kind of nod and go along with something, being like, "Oh yeah, quantum entanglement and quantum tunneling. Yeah, I'm good with that." You know what I mean? He's gonna ask questions about it.
He does. Yeah.
I just ask people to explain stuff that he doesn't understand or know. So that's a big part of the allure, I think, because there's something about it that's very genuine, and it's just the exact opposite of the media, which is so often this vehicle for tiny little bits of information that become like little bricks in a wall of bullshit narrative,
Yeah. The soundbite. When you started that sentence, I was thinking to myself, well, Joe Rogan is media, so it's not like he's any different. But what you're saying is you're making a distinction between that traditional media, and that need to get something across quickly with a political, usually more now than ever with a political point of view, versus a 3-hour long drawn out conversation. Where
Exactly.
You can really dig in. Yeah.
Somebody can have a 3-minute, kind of series of responses where everything they're saying is something they've already thought through. And something that's kind of pat answer. So they could have 24 pat answers. They're asked 6 questions. They can cover it, But over 3 hours, people are going to see you for who you are and your reaction to things and your reaction just to even like this. This is a little random, I guess, but I've always been a huge fan of small talk. I know people like to act as though like small talk is ridiculous or something, or it's not worth the time, or it's below them. I just the strangers in the street, whatever, just short little conversations about very generalized information. You're still getting a sense of the kind of boundaries of the individual's personality, even if they're just reacting to a question about the weather, but they say something in such a way that it's kind of witty, or a pat response that's done in such a way that you realize they're really stressing the cliche to make a joke out of it being a cliche or something. There's so many different ways in which you can kind of dig in to the generalized conception of where somebody's personality is at in some kind of personality landscape. Via small talk. So a lot of the things that end up happening on the show end up being kind of small talk related, like just tangential issues or, and of course always DMT. Can always fall back on DMT. Anyway, what were you saying? I got a DMT story. So it's
right.
There's just all kinds of stuff like that. But in that person who's being interviewed by Rogan, in their reactions, you're inevitably going to see to some degree who they are. You can't hide for 3 hours. You can hide for 3 minutes and 6 questions.
It's very interesting. So I wasn't going to talk about this because I couldn't remember the specifics of it. So I watched the Malone podcast, half of it, and I stopped watching because I had one of those blink moments where I was like, this guy's full of shit. This guy's just promoting himself. And it was just one of those where, and it was very minor what he said. It was something about a past like deep study he had done. And Rogan was like, oh, tell me more about that. And he kind of couldn't remember it.
Yeah.
And what I'll have to do is find it because I wanted to find it before, but it's going to take a while. But to your point, it's like you can see a person talk for 3 hours to the point where I'm like, hey, I've listened to this guy talk a lot before. I like a lot of what he says. I think a lot of what he says is maybe on the line. I'm not a fan of his either.
Yeah.
But I had a moment in that interview specifically where I'm like, I think I'm out on this guy.
Yeah.
And
how would you not remember this
interesting.
major research key?
It was like that. It was sort of, and it was Rogan. Just all he did was he asked the question, and I was wondering myself. He was like, "Oh, I didn't know that. Like, tell me more about that." I'll have to find it, and you can cut this part if it doesn't quite fit.
No. This fits perfect. I think this is great. You know, because that's exactly it. And a lot of times, that's what makes a lot. You know, just your situation with what you just said. This is what makes things so difficult in so many ways. In trying to talk about the idea of canceling someone. Like, what is it you think you remember about what someone said that is, you know, grounds for what you see as cancellation? Do you have it right? Memory is a porous thing.
That's a great,
you know?
Because look at it. What did I just do?
Right.
There's a point of view that I've just told myself to reject in the future, and I can't remember why.
Yeah.
I know it has something to do like with how I read him and his reaction, but what's to say I wasn't wrong there?
Exactly. Yeah. And you know,
that's so trippy.
A lot of times you can get, I mean, especially in this podcast medium as well, you often are, if you're watching it, you know, you can get a feel for the person's comfort level by how they're moving, you know, just on and on and on, body language, etc. So there can be a lot of different things that might spark a feeling of like, wait a second, you know, I think you're full of shit. I don't know why, but I do, you know.
Something about the big picture.
Yeah. You kind of got to let the intuitive thing run for a bit, but.
So this is off subject, but I just watched most of a documentary about Mike Wallace. It was on Hulu, I think. And it just went through his career, and you know, he had this combative interview style that he was known for. But there were these clips of him talking to Larry King about what makes a good interview. And Larry King's known for being like king of the softball questions, like the opposite. But those guys were friends, you know, and they were just cutting it up about how you interview somebody. I thought that was pretty interesting. So we're talking about Rogan and how he interviews. I'm a big fan of Stern and how he interviews, but I hadn't thought of it until just now. That documentary was kind of it talked about that kind of stuff a little bit. So
that would be hilarious to see Wallace and King even talk. You know, because Wallace would be all cutting and King would be all soft and kind, or something.
That's how it is. They're like hanging out in somebody's living room, and he's like, Larry, you don't do a very good interview. All you ask are these stupid questions that you know your interviewee wants to be asked.
Yeah.
And Larry's like, well, the way you do it's all fucked up. Like it's all wrong. Like like all you're doing is
riling people up.
You're not getting anywhere.
Yeah.
So. And both of them eventually get somewhere.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Or got somewhere in the way they interviewed.
Yeah. It's just different paths to the same kind of bringing out of someone's, you know.
Yeah. Mike Wallace is Here, I think is what it was called. And I put it on in the background because I needed to do some work that I needed to focus on, but I wanted something that wouldn't distract me. And of course, I didn't get any work done. I just sat there and watched it for an hour.
Oh yeah. Well, that's good. I'll definitely check it out. Mike Wallace is Here. That's on Hulu.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I think so.
Well, I think that
pretty good.
Generally dives into most of the things I wanted to talk about.
Yep. And I wonder if it's going to keep rolling on. This feels like one of those things that's going to die pretty quickly. Like.
Yeah. Well, I don't think there's any chance of Joe Rogan being canceled. I don't. I could be wrong. I can always be wrong, but I just don't see it. And I mean, why would anybody want that anyway? And you know, everybody's yelling crime and not pointing at one. You know, what was it?
Yeah.
What was it that was said that is so toxic that if this information is released upon the world, tens of thousands of people will die? You know,
I was kind of shocked there wasn't more specifics because it's been 2 weeks, and even people who aren't interested in this topic would be interested, but we're interested in the kind of the controversy.
Yeah.
I'm surprised more people haven't like really spent the time digging in and trying to find something, or if they have spent the time, maybe they didn't find anything. I don't know.
Right.
I thought I would find a lot more when I was reading today.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I mean, it is like between McCullough and Malone's thing, it's like 6 hours probably of content, but
It's a lot.
it's still like if you're willing to tell an organization that either he goes or I do, I would think you would do enough of your homework to be able to point at an example.
Yeah. Or engage in the conversation. That was another thing I read, is that Daniel Ek reached out to Neil Young right away, like, hey, let's talk about this. Neil didn't pick up the phone. Like,
Really?
yeah, so it tells me, like, again, it's another indication that this is not really what Neil was bitching about.
Yeah.
He really had something else in mind.
Yeah. Maybe I'd love to know if there was some meeting between him and the hypnosis people about, you know, if we're gonna pull your catalog.
That was deep in there. I mean, I can't imagine they could have done this move without reading.
Yeah.
If they're 50-50 owners, right? Like, unless they own, well, no, even if they owned a distinct half of his catalog and he owned the other half, he couldn't pull all of his music down.
Right. I wouldn't think so.
Without their say-so.
Yeah. So yeah, there had to be some conversation up front, even if it was just Neil calling up and saying, "I'm doing this. I'm Neil Young." You know.
Okay.
Down